what does it do? After all, the guy didn't have all that much experience to begin with.
Yeah, well, look, I think there's no great loss. The service secretaries by law actually have no impact whatsoever on military operations, which all go through the Secretary of Defense and directly to the combatant commanders, the four-star admirals and generals globally who are running U.S. military operations. So I don't think it's impacted on the war at all. Now, firing the Army Chief of Staff, General Randy George, is a different matter. These service chiefs also do not have command authority over ongoing joint operations. However, by law, they have individual and collective responsibility to provide advice to the National Security Council and the President of the United States. We spend 20 years developing these Army leaders, military leaders. I had 5 years of postgraduate education as a run-of-the-mill four-star. So when you let them go in considerable numbers, which the Secretary of Defense has done, you create a leadership void. This is serious. There's a lot of turmoil over there. I don't know exactly the motivation, but we're ending up with a chaotic, non-policy process way of making national security decisions. There's no real interagency process here. We've got Truth Social at midnight announcing policy changes.
Yeah, and as I understand it, there's another Truth Social from the president just from moments ago where he says Phelan left on his own. The question, Tom, I have for you is, what does it mean if Phelan wasn't qualified to begin with? I guess, what does this say about Hegseth and his leadership when you take the firing of Phelan and the Army Chief of Staff and the woke culture purges all together?
Well, I would separate those two things because Hegseth, when he first came in, really wanted to make his bones as, the guy that was going to turf all these woke, and by woke, he means black and female senior officers. But I think what's going on now, and I think what you're seeing with Phelan is Hegseth is very worried that he's going to lose his job. And so he's trying to repopulate the Pentagon and its environment with people who won't support him getting fired, who will stand up and say, I owe my job to Pete Hegseth. He's a great leader. Please, Mr. President, don't let him go. That's one of the things. This is kind of how palace politics is played in Washington, that you repopulate a lot of the offices around you with people that are loyal to you, so that first of all, then the scuttlebutt about getting fired doesn't become scuttlebutt because nobody will talk about it because they're your friends. But also it's a way of saying, if you think about, switching sides, I can have the president relieve you. So I think what's going on with all the firings of these officers when Hegseth first came in was part of this just weird crusade he's on. But I think what you've been seeing in the past few months is very much part of his struggle with what he thinks is a movement to get rid of him. And he's trying to firewall himself off from that.
All right, that's interesting. Jake, I know you've got a heart out. I want to talk to you about what's happening in Congress. There's a May 1st deadline regarding the war to get congressional approval. The War Powers Act keeps on failing. What is the latest?
Members of Congress, Republican members of Congress now say, Katie, actually the 60-day deadline is not what we're looking for anymore. We're going to give him another 30 days, the president that is, to figure out what he's going to do until 90 days, and then we'll pressure him. I mean, Katie, I'll just say this, because I think this is just, it bears repeating. This Congress has just abdicated any role when it comes to this war in a way that's just so remarkable. I mean, no oversight, hardly any hearings. They have no interest in being involved here in a way that's alarming, and it should alarm everybody because Congress sets the policy, fills the budgets, and has say over matters of war and peace. And the idea was that the administration would eventually send up a supplemental spending request for Congress to fill, so to pay for this war. They have not done so yet. They now say privately they're not going to do it until after hostilities end to backfill weapons. I don't know when that will be. I don't know if they can wait that long, but that was supposed to be the pressure valve. It no longer is because they haven't sent it up and the war is continuing. So it's just a further abdication, a further erosion of Congress's power when it comes to war and peace.
I know you just ran into Speaker Johnson. What does he say when you confront him with this abdication?
He says he trusts the president, basically, and this is a worthwhile mission that that he's getting briefed on and that Congress is involved in, but Congress is not really involved in it. But that's the basic line from everybody. We're going to give this time to work. We're going to give the president a chance to execute his policy. But I will say, in recent weeks, there's been more itchiness, more concern about the end game. And the end game is just not clear to anybody.
Let me show you this concern. We have a number of quotes from Republicans. Here's Todd Young, Indiana. Time to wrap it up as quickly as we can, just the past couple weeks. Leader Thune, they do need a plan for how to wind this down. Lisa Murkowski, we should have a better handle on where we're going with this. Susan Collins, very likely that I would vote not to authorize further hostilities. Rand Paul, only Congress can declare war. He's always going to say that. Also, Thomas Massie, this is not America first. You have some of the familiar faces here, Jake, but then you also have the Todd Youngs and the Leader Thunes who are getting itchy. Are there other Republicans out there that might wield more influence with the White House if they were to get fed up?
Maybe Lindsey Graham. Is the only one I can
but
really
that's
think
not
of, and
happen,
I don't. Right, I was going to say I don't see that happening, because aside from the policy matter, right, the policy matter being, are we getting into a never-ending, unending war in which we're going to have to put boots on the ground, and we're going to have to up our involvement in the region? That's the policy matter. Then there's the political matter. We are now 7 months away from an election, and an electorate that has said they do not want war. And by the way, President Trump campaigned on that. And we have expensive gas, we have affordability issues, and people are going to go home with hostilities in the region and a seemingly chaotic backdrop to our geopolitical climate. And that's not a great mix in a year in which Republicans are already slated to do pretty poorly.
All right, Jake, I know you got to run. Thank you very much. Busy day there on Capitol Hill. All right, let's talk about the negotiations, Ben, because there are no negotiations as we speak. As The Economist is reporting, and the president is repeating this as well, a variation of it, there's not consensus on the Iranian side about how to handle this. When you have a negotiating team where everybody thinks that they are an authoritative figure in it, one that includes hardliners that don't want to negotiate at all, with America, and diplomats who negotiated the 2015 nuclear deal, how does the U.S. even come to the table if the U.S. wanted to? Also, if the U.S. was also not chaotic and indecisive.
Well, Katie, none of this is surprising. And it's very important to state that the people in control of Iran today are the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. And look, the United States and Israel killed Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, and they killed Ali Larijani, who was the only other Iranian political figure that might have been in a position to kind of bring together the factions of the IRGC and the political leadership. The reality now is the IRGC is in control. They're the ones who shut down the Strait of Hormuz, not the political negotiators who are in Islamabad. They're the ones who will decide if and when, from Iran's perspective, this war ends. And an important thing I'd stress, Katie, having been involved in these negotiations, this dynamic is always at play. When we were doing the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, oftentimes Javad Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister, would complain about things that we were saying about what we were pushing for in negotiations, because it was the IRGC was calling him and giving him trouble. Now imagine that you had the first round of negotiations in Islamabad with these political negotiators there who are experts on things like nuclear issues. And then Donald Trump goes on Truth Social and he starts posting that Iran has agreed to permanently open the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has agreed to not enrich uranium. He starts Truth Social posting last week, essentially a complete capitulation by the Iranians. it should be no surprise that when those negotiators got back to Iran, the IRGC was probably saying to them, what on earth are you doing? You're not even allowed to go back to Islamabad to talk. That's what happened. I mean, we're seeing this. What Donald Trump says on Truth Social is not what is actually happening. And I think people need to kind of learn this lesson. I don't know why we're learning it 10 years into this. But the reason that the hardliners are empowered is because that's been the outcome of the war. The IRGC is calling the shots. It's not even a moderate IRGC debate. The moderates might show up at the talks, but they're going to have to get approval from the IRGC. And that's why it feels so tenuous about what is going to be agreed to, because what can Donald Trump and the IRGC both use to declare victory? That's a hard Venn diagram to assemble.
I know you don't have a crystal ball, but how does this end? How do you expect this ends?
I mean, the best case scenario for a diplomatic agreement is probably what the Iranians want is money. Either oil sanctions lifted, huge payments from unfrozen assets, or the ability to toll the Strait of Hormuz. And so they might get to a point where they agree to ship out their stockpile of highly enriched uranium in exchange for a significant amount of revenue. That's not even as far as the Iran nuclear deal, because that doesn't involve kind of having intrusive inspections into their facilities. Hard to see the IRGC going for that. That's probably the most likely kind of deal, like a nuclear deal that is not touching the ballistic missiles, that is not a permanent prohibition on uranium enrichment in Iran, but kind of ends the hostilities. There's another scenario, though, Katie, where there's no deal. And there's this kind of frozen conflict. Maybe even sometimes there's an uptick in hostilities or there are tensions in the Strait of Hormuz. That's a very unsettling place to be, because then you wonder, well, do we know that the Strait of Hormuz is definitively open? Who's in control of it? But I think we have to start to realize that there may be a reality where it's not really clear what's going on. It's just kind of another frozen conflict in the Middle East.